linked to similar health outcomes we've seen from BPA. Because in order for plastic to be plastic, they need BPA or some sort of BPA substitute, which does basically the same thing. So given all of this, given the scope of both the environmental and human toll of plastics, why is the mountain of plastic and the prevalence of microplastics rising? To understand that and to understand how we've so monumentally failed to curb plastic pollution, we need to turn towards the fossil fuel industry itself. In February of 2024, the Center for Climate Integrity released a bombshell report, one that revealed 5 decades of deception from the oil and gas industry. But this wasn't about their decades of misinformation and obfuscation of the connections between fossil fuels and climate change. Instead, it detailed the insidious maneuvering of fossil capital to ensure plastics continue to be an essential part of the global economy. As I've already mentioned earlier, plastic companies are just another wing of the fossil fuel empire. It's just oil and gas packaged in another way. And as backlash against fossil fuels mounts, oil giants like Shell and Chevron are increasing their plastic output. But the plastics industry is vulnerable to public backlash. Indeed, the history of plastics is marked by deceptive marketing and tactics to quell public dissent about the toll of plastic pollution. At the core of this strategy, as the Center for Climate Integrity reveals, is selling consumers on recycling. To be clear, recycling is not a solution to the glut of plastic production. For one, the vast majority of plastics that consumers throw into the recycling bin aren't recycled into new products because there is no market for the specific type of plastic under capitalism. As the Center for Climate Integrity explains, certain types of plastics have no end markets, and therefore are impossible to recycle. To date, viable markets only exist for PET and high-density polyethylene plastic bottles and jugs. These are known as plastics number 1 and 2. In addition, there are so many different types of plastics, and recycling needs highly pure plastic. So a plastic bag or bottle that is made from several different types of plastics can often be unusable or too energy intensive to transform into usable plastic again. And finally, even if something is recycled, you can only get 1 to 2 cycles out of the process before the plastic degrades into unusability. And because of all these hurdles, plastic that ends up in recycling usually isn't turned into something new. It ends up in the landfill or in our oceans and rivers. Indeed, the US recycles just 5 to 6% of its plastics. And yet, to keep their production line churning, fossil fuels flowing, and profits growing, the petrochemical industry championed recycling as the solution to plastic waste throughout the mid-1980s to the late 1990s. During that period, as one petrochemical representative testified in Congress in 1992, there was a rush to demonstrate environmental purity. The call was to recycle or be banned. As a result, fossil fuel companies like Exxon Chemical, alongside bottling companies, created the Plastics Recycling Foundation, which was used to assuage lawmakers' fears about plastics by claiming that the industry was researching plastic recycling and would tackle the problem. They did this, as one internal industry letter explains, to deflect some harsh restrictive language, singling out plastic as a difficult material to collect and recycle. Recycling, then, was a shiny object the industry could hold up to distract from their destructive overproduction. And the petrochemical companies did this even though they knew recycling wasn't a real solution. As one of the founding members of the plastics industry front group, the Vinyl Institute, explained at an industry conference in 1989, recycling cannot go on indefinitely and does not solve the solid waste problem. Indeed, the Vinyl Institute, a front group for the plastic industry, released a report in 1986 that explained recycling cannot be considered a permanent solid waste solution, as it merely prolongs the time until an item is disposed of. And yet, instead of curtailing plastic production or finding a better waste management solution in light of the damning research on recycling, the petrochemical industry doubled down and championed its potential through marketing.
The more you recycle, the more recycled plastic we can use in the future.
Millions of them are being recycled every day, which we can use to make things like strong, lightweight garbage cans.
According to the Center for Climate Integrity, the plastics industry pushed for things like resin identification codes on packaging that made it seem like their products were actually recyclable when they really weren't.
The average person saw the symbol and said, well, it's recyclable, right?
Got 3 arrows.
And like, well, all of a sudden, our own customers, they would bring it in and not only say it has the triangle, but they would flat out say, it says it's recyclable right on it. And I'd be like, I can tell you, I can't give this away.
Meanwhile, plastics companies promoted commitments to recycle vast amounts of plastics, even though they knew they were unattainable. One representative from DuPont admitted as much to a recycling conference in 1992, explaining that it is no secret that the quantitative goals industry originally set for itself for economically recycling plastic containers extracted from municipal waste streams were extremely ambitious. In short, the plastic industry wielded false commitments and false hope to deflect attention away from their industrial pollution throughout the 1980s and 1990s. And that campaign was successful.
If the public thinks the recycling is working, then they're not going to be as concerned about the environment.
Recycling exploded in popularity, and backlash against plastic in the form of bans quieted down. Today, however, as plastic bans and ire over microplastics threaten business again, fossil chemical businesses are once again using similar tactics. This time, they are claiming that advanced recycling will save us.
And that's what's really exciting about advanced recycling, because this allows you to address the hard-to-recycle plastics that can't be recycled today.
Because the knowledge that conventional recycling is not only ineffective, but also essentially a sham to individualize the problems of the plastic industry, petrochemical and packaging companies are embracing chemical recycling. An old technology with a new name, chemical or advanced recycling, has been proven again and again to be economically unviable, ineffective at recycling many plastics, and often just transforms plastics into toxic waste or fuel. And much like in the 1990s, petrochemical companies are championing ambitious recycling goals to distract us from their pollution. ExxonMobil, Dow, and Chevron Phillips Chemical have all announced pledges to increase their advanced recycling capabilities. As we have seen time and time again, capitalists are interested in the accumulation of profits. All else comes second. So paying lip service to cleaning up plastic pollution until anger wanes seems to be the continued strategy of fossil and petrochemical capital. This must end. It seems that true change and harm reduction in terms of plastic must be forced upon fossil capital. The unfortunate reality is that plastics have been crucial for certain aspects of life, from everything from healthcare to avoiding massive amounts of food waste. But those plastics represent a minuscule amount compared to the oceans factories churn out today. The reality is that plastic production is following the logic of capitalism. Its overproduction is pushing into every nook and cranny of our lives. A world without toxic packaging materials and physical plastic pollution seems far away, but we must start now if we are to make it there. This means employing stopgap solutions. Immediate harm reduction strategies could look like the banning of endocrine-disrupting chemicals from plastic production while ramping up production of plastic alternatives, as well as pushing for the elimination of needless plastic. But ultimately, an end to plastic and microplastic pollution won't come from tinkering around the edges. Petrochemical companies must be held accountable, both for past harm and future production. The plastic industry must be held accountable for the end of life of their goods, much like glass bottle companies used to collect their own bottles for reuse. But to truly minimize the impact of plastics on our world and bodies, we must move away from a capitalist model that incentivizes the production of plastics and the dissemination of misinformation about the health of people and the planet. We must move from an economy based on exchange and profits to one based on use and needs. One where all non-essential plastic production must end and be replaced with biodegradable, non-toxic alternatives that leave little impact on the planet and our bodies. To build that world, we need to get up from our seats and take action. Fortunately, next month's video explores what you can do to help build that world and take climate action. And if you're a Nebula subscriber, you can watch that video right now, because Nebula subscribers get to watch all my videos a whole month early and ad-free. I love telling viewers about Nebula because honestly, I think think it's an amazing deal. I mean it when I say that our changing climate would not be possible if Nebula and the people who subscribe to Nebula using my link didn't exist. When you sign up for Nebula, you not only support this channel, but you can also watch more than 30 exclusive Our Changing Climate videos and extended editions. And you also get ad-free access to high-budget Nebula original plays, podcasts, and documentaries from over 200 creators, like Tom Nicholas, who produced a deeply insightful documentary on the questionable legacy of the baby boomers, or Real-Time History's original series on the history of Soviet Russia's nuclear power program that led to the Chernobyl disaster. Nebula is where I publish all my videos a month early and release exclusive bonus videos regularly, like the speculative fiction piece I just made about an eco-socialist future. I've already produced over 30 bonus and extended videos that are only available on Nebula, like this one on the problems with carbon capture, or this one on what it would take to build a 100% renewable power grid. If you want to watch and support curated and meaningful content created by your favorite creators, Nebula is the place to be. On Nebula, I don't have to worry about view count or video restrictions, which means I get to lean into awesome creative projects I never would have made otherwise. In part, this is because Nebula is a creator-owned platform. It's built for the needs of you and me, and not the demands of private equity or venture capitalists. And when you sign up for Nebula using my special link, not only do you get 40% off an annual subscription, but you're also directly supporting me, because I get a cut anytime you sign up using my link. So join today, support this channel, and get 40% off an annual subscription by going to my link at go.nebula.tv/OCC.
We're about to fly over California's Central Valley to get a unique perspective on climate change. This farmland used to be home to America's largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. The lake disappeared for over 100 years, and now it's back. But there's just one problem.
I have to admit, I got some butterflies in my stomach. I'm a nervous flyer, but I'm really excited to see this lake.
Okay, we are ready. Okay, so how long have you been flying, sir? I started flying in 1969, so that's something on the order of 7,000 hours of flight time.
Wow. Well, I feel safe.
The disappearance of this lake and its sudden return represents so many of the impacts of climate change on the most important building block of life on Earth: water. I'm Maya May, and I'm fascinated by our dynamic planet, our weather, and our climate. What began as a career in broadcast meteorology has become a mission to figure out where we are and where we're going as we leave this long, stable climate period and enter the hockey stick era. In this episode, we'll explore what's causing increased extremes in precipitation and drought, and how these swings are changing our food and our lives, and why agriculture needs to be a part of the solution. So join me in the field and on the farm to see what the brightest minds and the best science have to say about what's coming and how to prepare for a wetter and drier future.
Yes, the lake over there. Yeah. Wait, where is it?
California has always seen major climate swings that take years to decades to play out. Drought to flood and back again. A warming climate forces each of those swings further to the extreme. And that's exactly what the rest of the world should expect.
In a warming climate, one of the most fundamental things that happens, the ability of the atmosphere to hold water vapor increases exponentially, about 7% per degree centigrade or 3 to 4% per degree Fahrenheit of warming. And so I like to call this the increasing atmospheric sponge effect, because what the atmosphere does is indeed act effectively as a larger and larger kitchen sponge would.
This means that not only is it able to soak up and retain more water, but it's also able to precipitate more.
California's record rain has put one of the most important places in America for our food supply at risk. And also, it brought back a lake not seen in generations.
Tulare Lake was once the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. It disappeared in 1890 when its tributaries were diverted for irrigation, wiping away a central part of the Tachiyucat's way of life. In 2023, following a decade of extreme recurring drought, suddenly 12 back-to-back atmospheric rivers brought deadly flooding and Tulare Lake back to life.
That's Ba'ashi. That's what we call it.
How do you say it?
Ba'ashi.
Pa'ashi.
Yeah, Ba'ashi.
And that means?
Big water.
Big water.
Yeah. We have creation stories about the mountains on the east side and the mountains on the west side. Those were made from the bottom of the lake bed. Me, you, all of us people, we were made from the bottom of the lake bed.
That house is still underwater, and all this was all underwater.
Ba'ashi was essential to life for us Tachis and the indigenous people that lived in the Central Valley. We had elk, we had deer, we had antelope. We used to have grizzly bears.
See all those birds on the roads over there? Yeah. Those are some of the birds that had came back. That's crazy. Those are all birds? Wow. Like what it used to look like and all the wildlife that used to be here?
Now the lake bed is part of one of the most important farming regions in the world, and farming's impact on water here is huge. The lake returns during extreme floods every few decades. This time it took almost a year for the water to drain. Extreme precipitation events like the one that refilled Tulare Lake are expected to become more frequent and more intense in the future. And as the climate warms, most of the U.S. is actually expected to get wetter overall.
This can potentially lead to more severe floods, but also more intense droughts, sometimes in the same places.
Let's call this water whiplash, and it hits food production hard. Drought is the most significant impact, and flood a close second. But that doesn't mean we'll have access to more water. Globally, even as rainfall increases, we're running out of our most important reserve, groundwater.
There's a vast network of invisible water beneath us. It's what enabled America and many other places around the world to grow and thrive. We were able to pull seemingly endless amounts of water from underground to feed our hungry crops and to grow our cities. Even in the driest deserts, if you could drill a well deep enough, you could build a homestead, a farm, and even a major city.
The water is naturally stored in aquifers made of porous rock or sediment that can take tens of thousands, even millions of years to fill. Pump too much of this ancient water, and the layers can collapse. In particularly dry places, it's the only way farms can stay alive. But right now, we're facing a groundwater crisis. We can't see groundwater, so I'm going to a place where farms have pumped so much of it, they've changed the face of the earth.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. Essentially, this is just a crack in the Earth's surface. That's like mind-blowing. What exactly causes these fissures?
A lot of groundwater gets pumped out. So much groundwater gets pumped out that the sediment compacts and the ground surface actually sinks. Basically, it's like one side is sinking and the other side isn't, and you get a fissure in that zone where that changes.
So what you're saying is the actual surface of this ground has dropped.
If we were at the point where the maximum subsidence has been measured, that spot is now 11.5 feet lower than what it was in 1969.
There are over 170 miles of fissures in Arizona alone. And these are cracks in the earth that can quickly open and deepen, making our overdraw of groundwater visible. Texas has pumped so much water that in some coastal areas the land is 18 inches lower than it was in 1950, increasing the impacts of sea level rise, especially during extreme weather. Over the past 2 decades, the West has gotten drier, especially the Southwest. But even in places that are getting wetter, like Texas, Kansas, parts of the Midwest and East Coast, groundwater, our long-term storage, is drying up.
If you were to look nationwide and go to the High Plains Aquifer, or worldwide and go to places like Pakistan or the North China Plain, there are numerous examples worldwide of aquifers that are rapidly depleting.
And one big reason for these water shortages is global warming.
So higher temperatures dry out the earth. We now actually have a new term for this. It's a hot drought. And what we're finding is that higher temperatures lead to greater evaporation in all its forms. Plants are using more water's evaporating from water bodies, more water's evaporating from soils, and as a result, you don't have water that runs off into your rivers and creeks.
In the drying West, the Colorado River flow decreases 9% for each additional degree Celsius of warming. And if water isn't making it to rivers and streams, it certainly isn't replenishing aquifers.
In wet years, we use surface water, but in dry years, we rely on groundwater to make up the difference. That means water conservation is more important now than ever before.
So it's easy to look at growing cities in the region and point the finger.
Cities in the Colorado Basin have grown by 24% from 2000 to 2020, but they may not be the culprit, even in a city like water-hungry Las Vegas.
We've added, since 2002, about 750,000 new residents, and we're using 26% less Colorado River water than we were 2 decades ago.
Water-saving technologies have grown in popularity, and cities have cracked down on excess water use. So what sector uses the most water?
You have about 20% of the water going to municipal and industrial uses, and about 80% going to agricultural uses.
So the largest opportunity for conservation is in farming, especially with thirsty crops like those fed to livestock. And across the U.S., farmers' wells are running dry as water levels in aquifers drop. The temporary solution for many farms is to drill deeper wells and access more of the aquifer's water. But that causes its own problems.
How are you?
Good, I'm Maya.
Domingo Gonzalez, mucho gusto.
Domingo Gonzalez.
Yes, ma'am.
So here you have a well that went dry.
Yes, it did. We've been having a drought for 7-some years. Gradually, they start going down. My well went dry in 2021.
What is the situation like now that you don't have water?
Well, right now we have self-help that helping us. They bring water to us in those black tanks right there for bathing and restroom and washing clothes. But drinking water, they bring it in bottles. My well is only 60 feet deep.
So in that whole project of drilling the well deeper, what does that look like?
It would cost me $45,000.
According to a 2024 UN report, over half of our global population currently experiences severe water shortages for at least part of the year. And this crisis won't be solved by a few years of flood.
Agriculture is essential to human civilization, but it is also a central driver of greenhouse gas emissions. Hannah Ritchie uses big data to help find solutions to the world's most pressing problems.
So I asked her to help me understand the situation.
Food system as a whole contributes between 1/4 and 1/3 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So around a quarter comes from land use. Expanding farmland into grasslands or cutting down a forest to make space for the farms, that's around a quarter. Around 60% actually comes from emissions on the farm, applying fertilizer, for example. And if you have livestock, the manure contributes greenhouse gas emissions, and also livestock themselves. So cows, for example, when they burp, they emit methane, and that's a really powerful greenhouse gas. And then the final part is what we'd call maybe supply chain emissions, and actually this is what people often think about when they think about food emissions. They think about the packaging, so they think about the energy used for food processing, or they think about transporting the food. But all of those combined actually emit the smallest amount of the whole food system emissions. We won't be able to solve climate change without adapting and changing the way we produce food and what we eat.
In the fight against climate change, fossil fuels are quickly being switched to more renewable energy sources. But food is hard to replace. So how do we grow more food while decreasing water and emissions from agriculture? Well, according to Hannah, two of the most effective things we can do are to use less fertilizer and use less land altogether.
This is your farm, right?
It is my farm.
So tell me how this technology is working for Jeff's farm.
So we work on digital twins, so basically building a system that simulates the growth of plants on the computer.
This huge drone over here, that helps you do that, correct?
Yeah, that's the latest piece of technology right there. And
let's walk over
we
and
use
see
it to spray fertilizer, basically spoon feeding the crops.
Fertilizer is a huge source of greenhouse gas.
Yes, it is. And so it's very important to be able to apply the fertilizer based on the plant's need, because if you use it efficiently, you leave less nitrates vulnerable to impact water quality or greenhouse gas emissions. Trying to be the doctor on prescribing the right amount in the right place at the right time.
Okay, doctor. Let's see it in action. And this,
You should step back.
Okay, yeah, we should definitely step back.
We have built a system through artificial intelligence, through modeling, that is able to capture the complexity of the interactions that occur in agriculture, climate, genetics, management, and soil, and be able to understand what if you do something else, what is the probable outcome.
This digital twin of Jeff's farm reveals what areas need more or less fertilizer, and the drone delivers exactly that prescription and no more. Since fertilizer is such a large part of agriculture's contribution to climate change, precision application alone can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 20% while maximizing the farm's yield.
So we're basically bringing what we call digital agriculture, this site-specific management, this precision farming at scale.
And the efficiency of digital agriculture at a large scale unlocks one of Hannah Ritchie's most important points about land use.
So, what are we looking at here?
Well, this is one of the biodiversity conservation areas, some of the areas that they were unprofitable, and they're being converted for different purposes. There are parts of the field that they are always high productivity, parts of the field that they're constantly underperforming, and then there are parts of the fields that they change from one year to the next. So let's focus immediately on the low productivity areas.
Bruno's analysis found that the largest opportunity exists where crops are receiving too much or too little precipitation. Here, farmers are fertilizing and seeding, but not producing enough crops to cover their costs. The fertilizer and fossil fuels used to deploy them still release greenhouse gases and pollute water downstream.
So Bruno looked at data and maps and said, hey, Jeff, in this area, you're losing money.
Losing money. And so the win-win situation is to be able to remove these areas from corn production and putting them into biodiversity conservation areas, pollinators, native species.
And that means making farmers in the Corn Belt more money by using less land.
So when people think about human footprint on the planet, they think about cities and roads and infrastructure. But when you add those up, they come to a few percent of the world's land. We take the world's habitable land, so that's the land that's not ice or desert, stuff that we could actually use or grow forests on. Farming makes up half of that land, right? So half of the world's habitable land is used for farming.
Bruno estimates that over the entire Corn Belt, one of the most productive agricultural areas in the world, we could remove nearly 30% of the land from production with just a small reduction in crop yield. And the Great Lakes region where he works is one of the few places where ground and surface water resources are stable or even rising, making it an obvious place to grow our country's crops. But we organized our cities and our agriculture at a time when it seemed like water was endless. Now there are actual cracks opening in the earth, making it clear that time is ended. Still, 15% of our crops and 13% of our livestock come from the drying Colorado River basin.
So the Colorado Basin essentially extends all the way from the headwaters on the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado all the way down into Mexico. Most of the precipitation that contributes to the water in this basin falls in the northern half of it. The farther south you go, the deeper into the desert you get. But ironically, most of the agriculture in this region is actually in the driest and hottest parts of the lower deserts in Arizona and southeastern California. Because this region is getting drier in a warming climate, a lot of these agricultural endeavors are in some ways living on borrowed time and borrowed water.
It does not make sense to grow crops where there is no water available.
So much of what I've learned in this episode is actually pretty obvious. We need to shift agriculture from dry areas to wet areas. And we need to make sure farming in wet areas is as efficient as possible. But I can't stop thinking about the people that change would impact.
Hello. Hi there. How are you?
Nancy owns Kaywood Farms in the southern part of the Colorado River Basin in Arizona. During 4 of the last 5 years, she's had to leave at least some of her fields unplanted due to lack of water. In 2021, she had to rely completely on the almost non-existent rain. This year, she's decided to plant fields even before she knows if there will be enough water.
See, there's water in the ditch, and so this has just been watered. It's bringing water in on a lateral, and then there's a little ditch that's bringing it right over to our farm. And then we're just opening the gates and letting it flow.
Yeah, I know this makes you really excited.
It makes me really excited.
Nancy grows some of the thirstiest crops in the region as feed for cattle.
It takes 4 acre-feet to grow cotton, 7 to 9 to grow alfalfa. We're just trying to hope that we have enough water to pull us through.
We have these challenges with our weather and climate systems. Seems like it's just going to continue to get worse, and so you're going to continue to have challenges. I mean, how does that make you feel?
I fear the future of agriculture in Arizona. A lot of people ask me, why don't you just sell out? We've got solar here, we've got solar there, we're in a drought, and it just makes sense, right? This farm's been in our family for 94 years. My dad warned us before he passed. He said, you know, you may be forced to sell someday, and I hope that I don't have to make that decision.
Across much of the West, the transition away from farming in dry areas feels inevitable. Nearly all of Nancy's neighbors have chosen to sell their land to solar companies. But for many people, too much water is a more urgent problem than not enough water. Extreme precipitation is projected to get more common across most of the country, and most people will see an increase in overall precipitation as well.
I think we're beginning to see the effects of weather whiplash on our agricultural system. We have the flooding of Tulare Lake. We have reservoirs that are not large enough to hold back the torrent of floodwaters that comes during a wet year. And we have unprecedented droughts in which we depend increasingly on our groundwater reservoirs.
And you would think that despite the devastation caused by floods, that they would at least help to replenish groundwater by refilling aquifers. But on its own, water seeps into the ground slower than we pump it out.
Think of our current relationship with floods as avoidance. We want to build a culvert or a bypass to send a flood around a city. And the final resting place of the floodwater is the ocean. And so what we're talking about here is a management strategy in which we embrace the flood, where we take the floodwaters and we distribute the floodwaters to strategic recharge locations to fill our overdrafted aquifers. We make use of that floodwater.
This strategic distribution is key to speeding up recharge. So I went back to the Central Valley where Domingo's well and so many others have gone dry. I wanted to learn more about managed groundwater recharge.
Wow, this is really pretty.
So this is the Kings River.
Oh my goodness. Has there actually been enough water flow off of the Kings to support groundwater recharge?
Yeah, so it's been a good water year, and that's resulted in a couple of small flood releases, and that allowed us to basically bring in water for about 40 days.
2023 was a great year in terms of volume. The problem was the intensity. The state was pummeled by heavy rain over and over because, again, a warmer atmosphere carries more water, and when it falls harder and faster. So water officials had their work cut out for them.
As those atmospheric rivers and the very wet water year 2023 started to occur, we really sprung into action to maximize flood diversion, to reduce the flood risk, and then with a secondary benefit to maximize the recharge to start to replenish our groundwater basins.
That meant sending water over the levees built by previous generations, which delivered water quickly downstream.
So we were putting temporary pumps to pump flood water off the high flow rivers, put it out into recharge basins, let it slow down and sink in.
And it worked. Aquifer levels rose in 2023 and in 2024, but not enough to match the drawdown. So the state is identifying and building recharge basins in the most receptive locations.
Not all subsurface aquifers are created equal. Some are much more porous and conductive than others. So what that means is that there are some places that are ideal sites for recharge.
California flew electromagnetic equipment mounted on a giant hoop over the state's foothills and valleys. This technology created detailed images of the underground layers, helping to identify the best and fastest sites for aquifer recharge.
At this recharge facility, you can see we're surrounded by all of this red, which means that we are surrounded by sand and gravels here in the top 50 feet, which means this is a great recharge location.
So this helps you really pinpoint the exact area that you want to, build a system like this.
Exactly. So finding where those sands and gravels are really ideal places to set a groundwater recharge facility, because in those locations you can get water quickly back into the ground.
So this canal is bringing water in from where we started at the head gate.
Yeah, that's correct. We bring it through a series of canals, and this is how we deliver water to this brand new recharge facility.
This area was farmed until it was bought by the state for a recharge pond. Now it helps to both reduce the impact of flooding and store the water for future use.
Anywhere from about 500,000 to 1 million acres of irrigated ag land might need to come out of production to reach overall sustainable conditions in the valley. And that's a big change.
Airships seem like a bad idea. Exhibit A.
It's the greatest of miracles that anyone came out of the disaster alive.
The Hindenburg was filled with over 200 million liters of hydrogen, but it also had an iron oxide and aluminum powder coating on its outer shell, two of the ingredients that make thermite, a mixture that undergoes such a strongly exothermic reaction, it is used to weld train tracks together. But even if airships weren't giant sacks of flammable gas encased in questionable coatings, they would still seem like a bad idea, because they're big and slow. But right now, a handful of companies around the world are competing to build a new generation of airships. So why are they doing it? I came across the following argument in a blog by Eli Dorato, and I found it compelling, so I wanted to explore it. Think about how goods, all the different types of stuff, are transported around the US. A large amount of money is spent moving things around by airplane, but this doesn't translate into a huge volume of goods because air transport is really expensive. It's the fastest way to get something from one place to another, but you pay a premium for that speed. If you want to save money, you can transport your goods on ships using the waterways in and around the country, but that will be much slower. Still, since it's significantly cheaper, far more goods are transported this way, and more money is spent on it overall. Rail provides an even better option. It's faster than ships and cheaper than planes, so more goods are sent by train than by air and water combined. But by far, the way that most goods are moved around the US is by truck. What's interesting about this is that trucks are not as fast as planes. They take several days to get across the country. They are also not as cheap as ships. But the combination of speed and price puts them in this sweet spot of cheap enough and fast enough, which is why they transport the vast majority of goods. They are like the baby bear's porridge of transport options. Just right. Now consider how goods are transported internationally. The only options are planes and ships. Again, a lot of money is spent sending goods by air, but because it's so expensive, the actual volume of goods is low. And most goods, both in terms of dollars and weight, are sent via ocean freight. But what if there were a third option, faster than ships and cheaper than planes? It seems likely that most customers would prefer this new truck-like method of transport. Airships could be this option. They could be the trucks of the sky. They would transport cargo across oceans in around a week rather than a month for freighters. And theoretically, they would be several times cheaper than sending goods by plane. And they would achieve all this while emitting significantly less emissions than planes. See, while planes get their lift from their wings, and so they need to burn a lot of jet fuel just to stay in the air, airships get their lift effectively for free. The buoyancy of lighter-than-air gas keeps them up, so they don't need to move forward to stay aloft. As a result, modern airship manufacturers estimate airships can reduce carbon emissions by 90% or more. But for airships to become the trucks of the sky, they would have to carry a lot of weight, and historically that has not been a particular strength of airships. But that's where the physics comes in. The lift of an airship depends on the volume of lighter-than-air gas it contains, so lift is proportional to radius cubed, whereas drag depends on a combination of the cross-sectional and wetted area. That is basically the surface area of the craft, so it's proportional to radius squared. This means the bigger you make an airship, the more efficient it becomes. Lift goes up proportional to radius cubed, whereas drag only goes up proportional to radius squared. So there's a cubed squared advantage for larger airships. Want to boost the performance of your airship? Well, just double it in size. The area grows by a factor of 4, the volume by a factor of 8, so your lift to drag ratio doubles. If that's not enough, just double it again. To make airships the trucks of the sky, we need to build the largest airships the world has ever seen. There are 3 different kinds of airships. The first is a blimp, which is basically a balloon with a gondola and motors attached. Like a balloon, it is overpressurized to maintain its shape. Therefore, the skin of a blimp is in constant tension. As the blimp becomes larger, this tension increases. Moreover, it becomes increasingly difficult for larger blimps to maintain their shape. So you can't scale up blimps forever. The second option is semi-rigid. Just like a blimp, the hull is still in tension, yet now there's some added structural support to maintain the shape. The last variety is a rigid body airship. These have an internal structure to maintain their shape. Inside the hull, there are a series of gas cells filled with a lifting gas like hydrogen or helium. In this case, the gas cells are not overpressurized, so making them larger is no issue. The great thing about rigid airships is that they don't run into the same scaling limits. Want a bigger airship? Just scale up the structure and add some extra gas bags. In fact, the weight of the structure actually decreases as a fraction of the total weight, so rigid airships scale even better than square cubed. So it's this last option that is best suited for the cargo market. And that's what Eli proposes, to build a 388-meter-long rigid airship to conquer the cargo market. It would be capable of carrying 500 tons of goods at a speed of 90 kilometers per hour. That's enough to carry 2 Statues of Liberty at the speed you drive down the highway. If built, it would be the largest aircraft by far, both in size and in how much weight it could carry. Not bad for an airship. But to take a significant piece of the cargo market, you don't need just one airship. You need a fleet of thousands constantly moving goods around the globe. And if they take over half of the ocean freight container market at a price comparable to trucks, say 10 cents per ton kilometer, that would equal $650 billion of revenue per year. And if that was all served by one company, it would be the biggest company in the world by revenue. Bigger than Apple or Amazon or Walmart. So who is building these monster airships? Well, at the moment, no one. This part of the video is sponsored by Odoo.com. Just like airships, many of our own dream projects can be hard to get off the ground. But the first step is always the same. You just have to get started. And whether you want to start a business, a blog, or a side hustle, one easy way to get started is to launch your own website. This signals to the world and yourself that you are really doing this. And if you want a fast, free, and easy way to launch your own website, then check out this video's sponsor, Odoo.com. Just answer a few simple questions, select your favorite theme, and then Odoo's powerful software builds the core website for you. Then you simply go to any block and change it. Want to add an image? Just select the image block and drag it to where you want it. Next, click Replace to swap it with one of your own images, or if you don't have an image, just pick one of their free-to-use images. Adding a new page is also really easy. Just click New and add a page, and then drag and drop the blocks you want, and you're done. With Odoo, making your own website is a piece of cake. On top of that, Odoo also offers everything from accounting to email marketing apps, which can be easily integrated with your website. With Odoo, your first application is free for life, including unlimited hosting and support, and a free custom domain name for 1 year. So head over to odoo.com/r/Veritasium, or click that link down in the description to start building your own website today. I want to thank Odoo for sponsoring today's show. While transporting cargo is probably the largest market for airships, it's also one that's driven by fierce competition and low margins. And that's not ideal when you need to spend a lot of money to first build, develop, and certify your airship. What you want is a market with less competition and better margins. This is the Airlander 10, and it's built by the UK company Hybrid Air Vehicles. Can you tell me about the envisioned use of the Airlander?
They'll be going on extraordinary experiential holidays. So going to the North Pole, going on a safari, going over the Amazon. Knowing that they're making almost no environmental impact, being able to travel in some luxury and see things that you just can't do another way.
The first trips are scheduled for no later than 2026. Want to go on this trip? Well, you'd better start saving, because getting a cabin for 2 will cost you about $200,000. And while a few companies are focusing on the luxury travel markets, others plan to make use of another unique advantage of airships. Think about what it normally takes to move things around. Trucks need roads, ships need water and ports, trains need railways and stations, and planes need long runways and airports. Airships, on the other hand, require very little infrastructure. The most important thing they need is a reasonably flat surface to land on, like grass, sand, ice, or even water. And it's this unique ability that allows them to deliver goods where no truck, boat, train, or plane can go. Airships can connect parts of the world that have been disconnected forever, such as remote villages in Canada or Alaska. And they can do this with little to no infrastructure. Or what if the roads, rails, and ports have been destroyed by a natural disaster? Help is urgently needed to find and support the survivors, but there seems to be no way to get there, and no methods of communications once you are there. Well, then airships could quickly rush to the scene to deliver rescue workers and supplies, or to provide cellular service from the sky. Disaster relief missions like these are what LTA Research, which is backed by Google co-founder Sergey Brin, is focusing on. And they're making great progress. Their current prototype, the Pathfinder 1, has completed multiple indoor flight tests, and it's scheduled to fly outside sometime in the next few months. They plan to take the lessons they learned from these tests and build a series of airships that can provide help to disaster-stricken areas. Other times, roads may be available, but what you're transporting just isn't that compatible with roads, like long, clunky, and fragile turbine blades. To get them from the factory to the destination requires careful planning and perfectly choreographed maneuvers, and this process is what often limits the size of wind turbines. Airships don't have that problem. They can simply mount turbine blades of any size to the bottom and carry them to the destination. So it's much faster, easier, and it allows you to build more powerful wind turbines. Plus, airships can also easily transport other structures that are hard to move.
But sometimes, instead of delivering goods, you need to pick them up.
France is full of natural resources, like wood. Yet many of their forests can't be reached by truck, so they can't actually extract the wood they've chopped down. The French company Flying Whales, backed by the French government, is hoping to change that. They are developing this 200-meter-long cargo ship that's capable of carrying a 60-ton payload. It was designed to be able to hover above remote forests and pick up logs, which could then be carried off and turned into timber.
But loading and unloading from the sky comes with significant problems.
For starters, you need to make sure that during this process, your airship stays still, which is more difficult than it sounds.
So a very large airship has what we call sail effect. Even a relatively light current of wind, when multiplied by a really large area, is going to have a huge effect. That makes airships difficult to control, especially close to the ground and at low speeds. So they are a little bit unwieldy.
To overcome this, the airship is fitted with propellers all around the hull that can stabilize it. But still, this limits the use of most airships to places with stable weather.
A bigger problem comes from the fundamental reason why airships work in the first place. And this issue is particularly bad for large cargo airships. See, when an airship is carrying a heavy load, the combined weight of the load and the airship are offset by the lift. The problem arises when you release that heavy load, because now the airship is suddenly much lighter, and so it wants to shoot up into the sky. So you need some way to stop that from happening.
Unless we can solve that problem, we're kind of dead in the water in terms of airships so far.
A few methods have been proposed to solve this problem.
The easiest one is to decrease lift by venting lifting gas. The only issue is that most modern airships use helium, and to offset, say, 60 tons of weight, you would need to release about 54,000 cubic meters of helium, which costs a few $100,000. Not to mention that helium is scarce, so venting it isn't really a practical option. Now, you could use propellers to push the airship down, but that ends up burning so much fuel it negates much of the advantage of using airships in the first place.
The wheel dream has been to compress it. Because you take a lifting gas, and when it is in gaseous form, it lifts. When it is compressed, it's balanced, it's heavy. But there are some real problems with that. So you're talking about a very large airship with a very large volume of lifting gas. Now you need a compressor that's capable of compressing the amount of gas very quickly. And that is just a technological problem we haven't really developed.
Until then, the short-term solution is to replace the weight you're releasing. So if you're dropping 60 tons of supplies, you need to pick up 60 tons of ballast. If you want to pick up 60 tons of wood, you'd carry 60 tons of, say, water on board and release it at the pickup location. But there's another innovative...
Clean snow falls softly. Snow crystals cover the moor. May travelers lost and grown weary find shelter at my cabin door. Cold wind, cold
Olha, seria.
blows over the heather. The salt wind blows over the sea. Showing us down the mountain. Christmas to me. Oh. Cold wind blows over the heather. The salt wind blows over the sea. The harsh wind blows down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas to me. The clean snow falls softly, falls softly. Snow crystals cover the moor. Travelers lost and grown weary find find shelter in my cabin door. Let there be no fear of darkness, let there be no fear of sleep. May the lone star guide the lost and forsaken straight over the moorland to me. Over the heather, soft wind blows over the sea. The harsh wind blows down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas to me. Blows over the heather, salt wind blows over the sea. The harsh wind blows down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas to me. The clean snow falls softly, falls softly. Snow crystals cover the moor. May travelers lost and grown weary find shelter at my cabin door. So let there be no fear of darkness, let there be no fear of sleep. May the lone star guide the lost and forsaken straight over the moorland to me. Wind blows over the heather, the salt wind blows over the sea. The harsh wind blows down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas to me. Clean snow falls softly, falls softly. Snow crystals cover the moor. May travelers lost and grown weary find shelter at my cabin door. Let there be no fear of darkness, let there be no fear of sleep. May the lone star guide the lost and forsaken straight over the moorland to me. Harsh wind blows down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas to me. Sea. The harsh wind blows down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas to me. Green snow falls softly, snow crystals cover the moor. May travelers lost and grown weary find shelter at my cabin door. Let there be no fear of darkness, let there be no fear of sleep. May the lone star guide the lost and forsaken straight over the moorland to down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas. Sea. The harsh wind blows down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas to me. Clean snow falls softly, snow crystals cover the moor. May travelers lost and grown weary shelter in my cabin door. Let there be no fear of darkness, let there be no fear of sleep. May the lone star guide the lost and forsaken, straight over the moorland of me. Down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas. Over the heather, the salt wind blows over the sea, the harsh wind blows down from the mountains and blows a white Christmas to me. Clean snow falls softly, snow crystals cover the moor. Ain't travelers lost and grown weary, find shelter in my cabin door. Let there be no fear of darkness, let there be no fear of sleep. May the lone star guide the lost and forsaken, straight over the moorland of me.
Everyone has a certain line in the sand when it comes to topics they'll willingly entertain in a debate. And I'm certain that for the majority of people, screwing animals or kids is one of those topics that no one with a sensible brain cell would think to argue in favor of. Unfortunately, some choose to use the remaining few they have to do just that, think of rage bait or someone attempting to justify their depraved mental illness. It isn't too difficult to hop on the web and hear about the latest dipshit attempting to say that getting freaky with Fido isn't that bad actually. If you look through my video catalog, you'll see more than your needed fill of these types of people, but as someone who's covered people like this as much as I have, I couldn't help but realize something. It isn't a challenge to point out why zoophilia is bad. I realize this due to the fact that throughout my years talking about these kinds of people, the majority of these dog fuckers just repeated the same talking points to justify animal rape. They always bring up how their loving, not at all predatory relationship with animals is something a normal person just won't get.
Being a zoo is something we should all take pride in. We're a group of people who care more about animals than anyone else, and there's a lot of people in this world out there who don't understand, they don't know their animals, they don't care about their animals, they just don't get it. And we're people who do.
They always bring up how we should be fine with animal molestation since we kill animals for food.
Oh, animals can't consent.
I don't really think they consented to being turned into a cheeseburger or some chicken nuggets, but we find that morally acceptable.
And the most frustrating of them all, they always attempt to co-opt themselves into the LGBT, saying how being sexually aroused by animals is the same thing as being gay or trans.
Oh, well, it's immoral. Morality is a complicated subject.
Oh, brother!
As just mentioned, homosexuality is also considered immoral in many places.
As cliche as it is, I was born this way. It's just the way I am. Like being born gay or...
All of these statements being things that are either maliciously absurd or just flat out delusional. So because I began to notice this repetition, making videos going over statements or videos like this started to become a bit monotonous. There wasn't anything mentally engaging about typing a script where I said zoophile bad for onwards of 20 minutes or so. It got tedious repeating something you and I both know to be true because depraved people like this decide to show up every other month. So I began to wonder, what's the point in treating zoophiles as if their justifications actually hold any weight? Why debate these points rather than just point and laugh at someone who thinks the sexual attraction to animals is normal? Well, because then you get people like the subject of this video. People who, despite the justified stigma against zoophilia and pedophilia, will attempt to justify it, saying that those attractions are normal, and that because you think pedophiles and zoophiles are disgusting cretins, that you're the one who's actually endangering animals and children. In this video, I'll be briefly talking to you about a questionable content creator with a penchant for condoning the most disgusting of paraphilias, their method of doing so making it rather hard to tell whether they're a troll or not. This is a video about Dansburst Studios. First off, you're probably wondering who Dansburst even is. Those more familiar with My Little Pony might even be confused by the fact that Dansburst isn't using an original character they made, but an actual character from the show named Sunburst. Well, Dansburst is a 20-year-old brony, self-proclaimed neat, and Antifa member who goes by the name of Timmy. His name was found through a video where he and his ex-partner Michael were arguing over Halloween candy.
Michael, where did you put my Snickers bar?
Wait, what are you saying, Timmy?
Michael, you took my Snickers bar. You think I didn't see the? You think I don't see the fucking shit you do every day after Halloween?
a video that shows clear signs that Timmy isn't exactly all there mentally.
It's not even yours.
I knew you didn't care about me. You never, ever cared about me. You don't care about shit. You only care about your insatiable appetite. You just want to fill up your gut like the fucking pig that you are. This is why I'm never gonna be with you again. I'm gonna break up with you and you're never gonna see me again. I'm gonna kill myself, Michael, and you will be the one you will pay. Fuck you! Fuck you!
Yeah, fuck you. I'm gonna fucking hate you no matter what, you piece of fucking shit. You fucking talking like me. Don't talk like me. That again. Don't talk.
His time online mostly consists of role-playing the brother of Sunburst on Twitter, speaking as if he actually is the pony. This goes above and beyond the expected howdy every pony thing, as not only will Dan refer to his hands as hooves, but also women as mares and children as foals, all while going on a love quest in an attempt to add other MLP Twitter roleplayers to his harem, in one interaction even proclaiming that Equestria didn't have the same draconian age of consent laws in that dimension's human world. The only thing more disturbing than that being another notable exchange with a tweet that read, "I'm an incel, cause whenever someone consents to sex, I start cutting myself in front of them." To which Dan would respond with, "Plushes, can I r*** you? You have a new crush, huh? Sorry, I don't date blacks. Not even the ones. That's how strong my willpower is." A statement like this makes it a bit confusing as to why Dan won't date black people, but will proudly stand as a self-proclaimed member of Antifa, to the point this guy wrote a erotic fan fiction where the reader, the CEO of Antifa, essentially gets femdomed by none other than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC. I'm sure it takes a lot of willpower for someone to write paragraphs of AOC pegging the reader with a BLM-branded BBC strap-on, but outright refuse to even essay a woman of color. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, Benji, this has to be a troll of some kind. Obviously, this is someone on the lower functioning end of the autism spectrum, but this can't be the work of a mental disability. Well, that's where he gets you. Hearing these actions aloud, they're so insane and all over the place that you think,